Hello, Dr. Zach. How are you today?
Hi, Haidar. Yeah, I'm doing fine today. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. It's my day off today, so it's always nice when you have no, you know, proper responsibilities and just have, easier responsibilities. And when I say easier, it means family commitments, kids commitments, shopping, and all of those other stuff, which for some people, I guess, is not so easy. But
It sounds like a great opportunity to get on with making some podcasts as well.
exactly. Here I am speaking to you, and it's an interesting one, this, because we're kind of combining two podcasts together, and it's always a bit of a risk doing that because we have different perspectives and different outlooks and different listeners and different genres and sort of stuff like that. So tell us about your podcast and tell us what got you started.
Yeah, sure. So my podcast is called Healthy Discussions, and I started that last year when I was doing a project with the Healthcare Leadership Academy. They are an organization that are kind of trying to support early career clinicians to try and get some leadership skills, trying to up level them. And I was a big fan of the Sam Harris podcast, not because I agree with Sam Harris's views on a lot of things, but his style of doing the podcast where, people were talking about ideas. They were really trying to get to the truth of what was behind an issue. And that sounded to me like something I'd love to do. It was right up my street. And I thought, why not do this for healthcare issues as well? So that's kind of been the driving force behind it. And as I keep going and gain more experience, I'd really like to get into talking about some other issues as well. So I was really happy when you reached out to me, Haidar.
Yes. And what issues were really up your? I mean, I don't know what the Scottish sort of word is for sort of getting on your tits, so to speak. What were
Well,
your
I'll tell you what it's about. So the when I was at school, so in Scotland, you have a subject called modern studies, which includes stuff like politics and the justice system, and so you study things like that. And I was in a one of the sort of top private schools in Edinburgh. I was very lucky to be able to go there, and we were learning all about the health and wealth inequalities that existed in Scotland. And so I knew then at quite an early age, there's probably a lot of other kids out there that could do just as much as I could with these opportunities, but they don't have them. And when you start work as a junior doctor, you see that every single day, depending on what issues people are coming in with. A lot of the health issues, they're not just health issues in themselves. They're end results of health and wealth inequalities, education inequalities that have been there for a very long time. And I was very keen that in order to justify that privilege that I had, it was very important to me to be able to use that to make the system better for everybody. So that's kind of the driving force behind my interest in all of these different issues. It's just trying to think, well, what can I actually do about this to make it better?
And is this coming from a position of feeling, uncomfortable about being in this privileged position, or were you very comfortable about being there and it was sort of part and parcel of your identity?
Mm.
Or is
That's a
there
good
something else?
question. Yeah. When I was very young, I don't think I questioned it that much. But as I got older and I became more politically aware, I realized not everybody has these opportunities. And there's definitely some guilt that comes from that. I very much, I'm thinking in my mind, well, I need to do something today. I need to use these opportunities that I've got, because if I don't, then I'm wasting them. That's definitely something which is quite prominent in my thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I felt very guilty about everything, really. I mean, sort of because I felt so coming from Iraq and, being a refugee here, and then sort of going from starting from scratch and then working through the whole lower socioeconomic class and then sort of working your way up into the middle class. I always had that sense of guilt non-stop, within me, and that kind of kept me driven, so to speak, and sort of really single-mindedness and sort of laser focused into sort of climbing up the social hierarchy. And it's a powerful drive, there's no denying it. It's a powerful drive. And, you've got parent pressure and, coming from the Middle East, Iraq, you've got sort of driving parents that are sort of, the moment you have a bit of a rest, you're kind of, they take their whips out and give you a good beating to sort of get back on the horse.
Yeah, so you can either be a doctor or you can be an engineer. Those are the two options.
Yeah, or just don't bother, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that was that sort of constant drive there. So, guilt, and there wasn't much shame. I mean, the shame came along when you didn't actually, get A's or A stars, that kind of, oh my God, I've let my, my whole clan and sort of culture and, to a certain extent, religion down and so on. So, that was constantly at the back of your mind.
Mm-hmm. And is that guilt about, so when you left Iraq, or your family left Iraq, is it guilt about the people who are left behind there? I'm just thinking about the brain drain as well. Lots of people leave Middle Eastern countries and end up not going back.
It's so stark. It's so stark in the sense that, I remember we met up with my grandmother, and literally it was like my grandmother sort of taking my mum through a guilt trip about why she left Iraq. And it was quite harrowing, actually. It was quite harrowing because, seeing my mum, essentially being broken down psychologically, by my grandmother about, why did she leave, and we needed you. And at the same time, she couldn't stay because, my background is that, my family is a very religious family and involved in politics, and Saddam executed 54 members of our family because of the religious faith that they professed. So physically, we can actually stay there, but yet there's still that kind of narrative that, oh, you sort of left us, and you left us in the lurch, and you're the lucky ones to get out. So there was constantly that sort of narrative being driven at us. So you had to do something of your life here, no matter how difficult it was, and sort of how psychologically conflict, there's a lot of intrapsychic conflict going on there. And at the same token, you're in a society where, it's not about hard work, it's about so-called success without actually doing any work. That's the kind of general society narrative that the media drives at you constantly. It's like, well, you can take all these shortcuts and here you are, you're a billionaire. We're good at being lazy. I think that's the underlying curse for human beings. Is it's easier to be lazy than.
I sympathise with that point of view a lot. I think, especially about being here and that being psychologically difficult. I mean, my experience of, I also come not necessarily from there's different religions in my family. My dad's Muslim, my mum's not religious, come from a mixed heritage family. But very much, I'm seeing other people in the Muslim community really finding it difficult to reconcile that their parents' desire to keep in touch with their home culture and their own desire to kind of forge a path through living in modern Britain and trying to balance that up against each other. I think it's been a little bit easier for me because I came from a mixed race family. It's been a little bit easier for me to, or it's not been such a clash between work and home. But for people who it is a big clash, I think that is really difficult. And actually, they don't get a lot of help from community leaders. They don't get a lot of help from, you know, the quality of the thinking within the Muslim community about how to reconcile those two things isn't very good at the moment. I think that's starting to change, but yeah, very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think, you know, people, I mean, I don't want to, you know, blow my own trumpet, but, you know, people have sort of gone through these experiences and can make some sense of it and sort of some kind of resolution within this intrapsychic conflict. I think that's important. And, you know, having dialogue with other people of other experiences and sort of other walks of life and other philosophies and other ways of thinking. I think, you know, that's the start of understanding, you know, where the solution is. And, you know, it is about dialogue, you know. And I remember when I sort of, I mean, what I did is I went back to the fire, you know. I left the NHS for a period of time, and then I went back to Iraq to do ophthalmology there. And then
what was that like? That must have been eye-opening.
It was crazy.
And pardon the pun.
Yeah, it was fucking crazy. It was like going back to the sort of Middle Ages, really. You know, you turned into some kind of demigod and, you know, kind of a Lord of the Rings kind of person. And you got all these people,
like, you know, the saviors come back from the West.
It was crazy. It was sort of you know, quite a surreal experience. But, you know, I mean, I wasn't mature enough in myself to know me and sort of how to deal with these, you know, with these difficulties. I don't know. I didn't do a good job. I mean, I wrote about it. I mean, you know, that's, you know, that's what I did with the book, sort of, you know, trying to figure out a way of reconciling the two. But I mean, look, physically, I did a good job. You know, people got treated and, you know, eyes got treated, and, you know, I certainly reduced suffering for a lot of people there. But I was going through a lot of suffering because, you know, I realized that,
I mean, the needs outweighs far more of what you can actually do. And in one of my podcasts, I was speaking to Philippa Whitford, who's one of the Scottish National Party MPs in Westminster. She's a breast surgeon. Yeah. And she was telling me about her experience going to Palestine, where she was conducting services, you know, and there's a huge unmet demand there. And her warning was, you know, don't do this sort of thing and go broad until you've got a level of experience and seniority that you can really deal with this kind of stuff, because it is psychologically tough. And if you don't have something to offer, if you're still in that learning phase where you're kind of taking in more than you're giving back, then, you know, it's better to wait. So that's definitely a lesson I've taken on board.
I mean, I don't really totally agree with that. I mean, you know, if you have a certain degree of self-awareness, you know what you can deal with and what you can't deal with. So, and as you said, there's needs of all levels over there. So, you know, if you can diagnose pneumonia, that's good enough. You know, if you can diagnose an ingrown toenail and give antibiotics, that's good enough. So there's all levels of need there. If you can deal with maxillofacial cancers and, you know, remove half the jaw and sort of say that's good enough. So you're quite right. You know, there's, you know, the need is there, but you can go there at any time. So, you know, you don't have to be a consultant with 10 years, 20 years, 50 years experience. You can quite easily go there as you literally finish medical school and you go and work in a community clinic, and you'll do just amazingly well, and you'll learn so much, which is really important. I think it's more to do with the purpose and like the reason why you're there. You know, what is the ultimate why as to why you were going there? And the ultimate why for me was to serve my country and to serve my faith, and to serve my ancestry, so to speak, you know, rather than anything else. And what I realized was that I needed more maturing for myself, in the sense that I didn't know who I was, because I thought I knew who I was, and I was related and intimately with this faith. But I went there and I realized that I wasn't into the faith at all.
Well, that sounds very interesting. That's a very interesting realization. So, can we explore that for a bit?
Sure.
What was going on for you there?
Well, I guess I think it was like a narrative that I believed from other people. So I created a narrative dependent on other people rather than on myself. So I built a structure that was based on other people, i.e. my parents, my ancestry, and the faith related to that ancestry. So when I went there, I realized that this wasn't good enough. That this narrative that I'd built was actually not the right thing for me personally, because it wasn't sustaining me. So it was a non-sustaining narrative. And if you built your whole life on this non-sustaining narrative, which essentially is sort of based on ideology, and what I realized, that an ideology-based narrative breaks down in different situations.
Built this map, this representation of the world, how you think things ought to be, and then you go somewhere, you go to a different country, and you realize that's totally wrong. Now, what do you do? Exactly.
So I was sort of plunged in burnout and sort of existential dread and existential crisis and chaos. So I needed.
And what was it about being abroad that brought that on for you? It sounds like it was a very sort of faith-oriented kind of realization. Is it that people who you were sort of associating with, they didn't believe in the same way that you believed, and that that kind of opened your eyes to a lot of things?
Yeah. So I mean, essentially, it was lies, and I saw the lies there, but the most important thing is I was lying to myself. I was saying, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
But it wasn't okay. And, it took a friend of mine to say, look, there's something wrong with you, go and get help. And I actually saw a life coach at the time, for some bizarre reason. I don't know why. I got in touch with a Canadian life coach, and it was like, oh my God, actually I don't have to be an eye surgeon. And oh my God, I don't actually have to just believe in this ideology. And oh my God, there are sort of other perspectives and other realities and other ideas, and other paradigms and other representations.
Was this you kind of feeling that you've put all of your life into this professional sort of career, and there's no space for anything else?
I mean, it was, I've got this avatar, which is professional stroke faith-based avatar. And I reached a stage in my life where no, this isn't working anymore. I mean, since then it's sort of happened a few more times, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like but not as drastic and dramatic, because I'd invested so much of myself in this thing, and I didn't realize that I was kidding myself. I was just putting it off and blaming everything else apart from myself. That's what I realized, that I was putting the blame on Tom, Dick and Harry, but as long as it's not Haidar, you're okay. So yeah, but with that, you start sort of chopping and changing, and you start doing different things, and you kind of end up back in the same place, really. I've kind of ended up, in the same place, doing ophthalmology, and I've sort of come back full circle, back to the faith as well, but in a sort of different perspective, which is a bit weird. and sort of ultimately I've come back to the same purpose, which is reducing suffering. And that was my ultimate reason, for life and purpose in life. And my ultimate meaning is to reduce suffering for others, so that I can inadvertently and indirectly reduce suffering for myself. So
I think that's very interesting, because while that's your individual story, I think that's happening to lots and lots of people in medicine at the moment, and that maybe the specifics aren't the same in terms of the cultural and religious kind of side of things, but that sense of not really being sure what the purpose is, you can see why that happens in medicine, because the way the career structure is set up is that you make sacrifices in the short term, and you do that for a period of a decade up to 15 years until you have the career progression in the consultant job, which, by the way, you might not actually like, because you've not actually done that job. You've only been minimally exposed to it and been asked to kind of select what you think you want to do at a very early stage before you actually get to do it. So I don't think it's surprising that some people get to where they've been told, this is where everything's going to get better now, and they actually find, I don't enjoy this. Yeah. And I think that I don't know the statistics on this, but I do get the feeling at my stage, some of my peers, you do see the attrition rate. I'm seeing people who are in the first 2 years of being a doctor, and they are really not enjoying it. They've sacrificed a lot of time, study time, getting this medical degree, and normally for good reasons. And then they find out that actually the actual job is not something that I am equipped to deal with, and B, it's not something that I enjoy or want to spend the rest of my life doing. And so they leave medicine because of those reasons. And I think probably that's the right thing to do, because I think the worst thing that you can do is you realize that something is not aligned with your purpose and you keep doing it anyway, because of fear or because of, whatever. Yeah. So,
I think it's important to be very clear about, what's the underlying narrative or myth of why you do what you do. And I think if you can translate that into everyday living, if you can personify that in your actions, in what you do on a daily basis, I think that's much easier, sort of to carry on, whether it's being a doctor or sort of not being a doctor. But I think, when you're younger, it is a cliche, but you are more impulsive and you're more likely to do things that you will regret.
And you've got to do, you've got to try things out, and
try things out. Definitely. But I mean, the point I'm trying to make is, there's a reason why you studied. There's a reason why you got through medical school, and it must be a very, very important reason for you. And if you can translate that important reason into something that resembles a physician or resembles a medical doctor, but doesn't necessarily have to resemble the typical, career or pathway that 95% of physicians do. So there's still a possibility of you, acting out that underlying reason and that underlying narrative structure that got you there in the first place. So, that's something to think about, rather than just, dumping the young junior doctor with the bathwater.
Yeah. So, Haidar, I've got a wee theory about this. I'm gonna share with you. I've not spoken about this publicly, but do you know the What 3 Words app?
What 3 words?
Yeah, what 3 words?
I don't know.
So the emergency services, basically, because people can't read grid references apparently. So if you're out in the country somewhere and you need an emergency, 999 have a very difficult time phoning, finding out exactly what your location is. Okay. But if you download this app, then
what 3 words?
Up the world. Yeah, so what 3 words? And it splits the world up into 3 by 3 meter squares.
Wow.
And it gives them 3 words. That's like a 3 word grid reference, and then they can come and find you, immediately.
That's a
And
lifesaver.
it's definitely a lifesaver. And it got me thinking, well, if you only need 3 words and you can cover the whole planet in 3 by 3 meter squares, well, if you want to find your own sense of individual purpose, which is different to everybody else's, all you need are to find what your 3 words are.
Wow.
And that's, totally unique purpose that drives you. And, for me, medicine is definitely one of those things. Although there are problems associated with being a doctor, I don't think I would want to leave the health service because of that. But I realize that, once you've got doctor, I've still got 2 other words I can use. That's, that allows me to get in what am I missing? What's the rest of my purpose? Because I know that my skills, my interests, they don't just stop at the field of medicine where the boundaries are. I've always been someone who's interested a lot more in the social structures, the institutions, the politics, even, as well as the data. So, that gives me a little bit of wiggle room if I think about it in that way.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sort of extrapolating here. So doctor is one word, the other one is possibly politics, and the third one is possibly data.
Yeah. So I think that the third one might be debating. And maybe this is something I should share with you as well, because when I was at school, there was the debating club, and at my school they were quite competitive. I wasn't one of the best debaters or anything, but that ability to, because the way debating works is you get told what the motion is. You don't get to choose a side. You get given what side you're on, and you've got to come up with a convincing speech within 15 minutes about how you're going to convince everybody else that you're on the right side of that debate. And people who are good at that, it's something that I absolutely admire in people, because I think it's a skill that can be practiced. Yeah. It's something that's very useful when you're communicating with people. How do you persuade people without coming across like, you're just, that you're a know-it-all or something like that.
Yeah, an arse.
Yeah, and it also gets you to think about problem solving. And we've said that we're not going to mention the C word, but when you look at something like that is a problem that needs to be solved. And if you don't have the skills to be able to convince others that your approach is the best, you're not going to get the problem solved. And I kind of think that's what's happened.
So I've never been a good debater, to be honest with you. I've always been a good listener, and but some people are geniuses in the sense that's their natural ability, and I think that the good debaters have that natural ability to debate and to problem solve, as you suggested. What do you think your natural ability is?
So I've realized, and actually there's a parallel here with you, because when you go through difficulty, right, I think you learn stuff about yourself that's really important. So I was doing a research post for the last 12 months and finding it really difficult because I was having to work from home a lot, and I didn't enjoy that. And I realized, so a couple of things that I'm really good at are speaking to patients. I really enjoy that. I'm very good at getting rapport with the patient and explaining things in a way they understand and smoothing things over when they get angry. I'm kind of very good at that. And the other thing that I'm good at is, public speaking. So getting up in front of a crowd would totally terrify lots of other people, but I actually quite enjoy that now. I still get nervous, and depends, what you're going to say and how controversial it is, but it totally doesn't bother me being up on, in front of other people and saying stuff that you think is important. So I would say those are the two skills I'm quite good at.
And what stuff are you pretty shit at, and think, no way.
What stuff am I rubbish at? Yeah. So this is the bit when you realize, oh, if I can't come up with a good answer like right away, then maybe that means that I'm like really arrogant. No, there's plenty of stuff that I'm not good at.
Well, I mean, let's say what are things that you want to work on that you think is worth working on, and it's going to make a big difference to your life.
Well, I think the resilience thing, definitely. I mean, resilience is a little bit of a debate in itself that's happening amongst junior doctors. Like, how much of resilience is actually like you need to work on yourself so you can deal with this better, and how much is just this is a really rubbish situation and even a normal person would struggle dealing with it. But when I think about it, I have a tendency to want to avoid conflict and not want people to be upset with me. So if it's something that I don't think is very important, I will just sort of cave in to that person. And I've realized that that's not always the right thing to do. Sometimes you do need to kind of stand up and say, actually, I really don't think we should be doing this, and challenge somebody. So I find that difficult. It's definitely something I need to work on. But again, as you get exposed to more difficult situations, you learn about how to do these things better. So
can you give an example of when that happened recently?
Yeah. So there's been lots of examples. But so when you're a foundation doctor, you have to get feedback from your colleagues. And
painful.
This is so this is like a kind of management thing. Every 4 months you got to ask all your colleagues, what do you really think about what I'm doing? And then they write stuff anonymously about you, and then you go through it with your educational supervisor. So I got okay feedback most of the time, but sometimes you just get a comment that you're not sure where that's come from. Someone's clearly not very happy with you, but you don't really know why. Because they've not explained it in a way that's like, all right, I can see what I've done, I can correct it next time. They're just kind of having a go at you. So I'd love that shit.
Actually, I'd love that shit. I'll be one of those individuals who say you're an absolute asshole, and I'd leave it at that.
So, I mean, my initial reaction to that is to get very upset, and that's not really the best way to deal with it. You have to be professional, and you have to make the changes. But how I ended up responding to that was, well, I need to be really sure that I'm not upsetting any of my colleagues. So after that, and in my next placement, I wouldn't speak up for anything, because you're not incentivized to it. It's very important that people don't raise concerns about you, otherwise you don't progress to the next stage. So I think that's something which is more generally true of how clinicians are assessed anyway. People don't want to be associated with any concerns, so they pipe down if anything controversial is happening, and that's not always the best thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was the total opposite. I was a real rebel and sort of minor arsonist and anti-establishment junior doctor, and I barely sort of got through the signing off stage, and I must have persuaded them to do so. So I mean, I've actually totally mellowed out, because I used to love conflict. I used to just love make everything burn and create the fire of chaos by, I mean, I was a sort of a mini dragon, so to speak. Fire everywhere.
I take it being in conflict, it doesn't upset you in the same way that it might upset people like me.
No, absolutely not. Total psychopath. When you come from a place of conflict, you're kind of used to it. And I guess one of the major reasons why I went to Iraq is because it's such a place of conflict, and there's civil war, and there's guns, and there's explosions going off and everything. I think to yourself, well, doing a senior house officer in Southend is, you kind of fall asleep, mate. It's like, fucking hell. You want some solid action. So yeah, I was a bit too much conflict. So I was the other side,
Mhm.
and now I've totally mellowed out and become a
And did
civilized.
you win your conflicts? Because this is something that interests me. Like, you don't want to create conflict if there's a better way of doing things, but sometimes if you can't,
No,
and you've
that's your
decided that,
natural state. That's
yeah.
you're used to that kind of heightened sense of emotional volatility and instability because you revel in it. That's what makes you alive. That's what allows you to hone your skills and and become a better rabble rouser and rebellious leader. So yeah, it's your natural state. You're in a process of flow when that happens. Time goes out the window. And
were there any advantages of being like that, I wonder?
Well, you get things done. You're quite productive. You have a following. You have lots of minions with you, around you. But yeah, it's all a bit, destructive, so to speak. But it's fun.
Yeah, because this question of like constructive conflict interests me, because I think that sometimes conflict is necessary, but you want it to go well, and you don't want to do it unnecessarily. So I'm always interested in hearing about people that have, stood their ground or had conflict for the right reasons and actually come out on top in the end.
Yeah, look, I mean, I got my funding for the charity work that we did in Iraq from the US Army, and I was funding an eye clinic in the Shia stronghold in southern Iraq. So how does that work? So two contradictions happening at the same time, but at the end of the day, patients got treated. Patients got their eyes sight treated. So the answer to your question is yes, conflict is very uncomfortable, but then there is a utility behind it because you get shit done. I mean, it doesn't sound very technical, but that's what happened. So yes, creating the conflict to allow a new path of result, and some people are good at it, and I'm one of them. But it does burn you out. So you can't do that for long periods of time. But whenever I needed something done, I'd go into my conflict kind of zone, and you'd get what you get pretty quickly because everyone wants to avoid conflict. So I wasn't the most popular of people.
Yeah, I imagine being mellow is more enjoyable for you and all the people that you're working with.
Absolutely right. And I haven't had a massive rant. I mean, the last time I punched someone at work was 3 years ago, so it's not bad. I've done quite well.
It sounds like you might be needing a recovery program. It's been 3 years since I last had a go at someone.
Since the last one I punched someone, but yeah, I mean, look, we're humans, but conflict is necessary, and I mean, I had a patient the other day, a psychotherapy patient, and we had a major fallout, and I felt really bad, and I felt guilty, but it was necessary, absolutely necessary for them to make better strides in their psychological well-being. I mean, even horrible people like myself get upset when we have to go into sort of conflict mode and sort of horrible mode. And I mean, I'm not totally psychopathic. I mean, I guess I was at some stage, but yeah, I mean, I'm glad I'm not going through foundation years at the moment. I would have left instantly. Other people sort of commenting about, and then you got to step on eggshells, careful about not stepping on eggshells, and oh bloody hell, I wouldn't have survived long at all.
something that I've discovered, which is quite nice, is that so I've done my foundation training. I'm in core medical training now. They call it internal medicine, but it's basically the old core medical training. And now that I've got that little bit of seniority, that does make a difference. I'm being left to make decisions for myself and get to use my own initiative. And that is psychologically is much better for me. It's not like you're at the bottom of the pile and you're just having to cope with all of the demand that's on you. So yeah, I always say to FYs that are struggling, it does get better, but you need to be sure that it's helpful if you know where you want to end up, and you need to have knowledge about yourself to know where that is, what kind of job is going to be suitable for you, what job you're going to do that you're actually going to enjoy. Because something that I've experienced in my FYs is that you see people who are consultants in their chosen field and they just look tired, man. They look really tired. Yeah. And, these are people who are at the top of their game. They're in their 50s. They've worked their whole career. They're nearing retirement. And it does make you think twice, like, actually, do I want to end up like that? Especially if you think that, actually, I'm not making that much difference on the front line. I perform my function and then I go home. But if I could do something with the whole institution, then I might be able to affect more lives. So, there's good reasons to stay in medicine, but there's good reasons to leave it as well. And it all depends on what you individually like.
Yeah. I mean, this brings us to the whole concept around hierarchy. I mean, the higher up you are in the hierarchy, the more likely you are to regulate your nervous system, and particularly your sort of serotonin levels and sort of what have you. And hierarchies are dissipated, so there's a constant flow between different hierarchies. So it's important for you to be somewhere in a hierarchy where you're quite high up in the hierarchy, just to counteract the other hierarchies where you're sort of right at the bottom and it's really, really crap and you're going through a lot of emotional instability. So if you are a FY1, which is really crap, and you have no say in actually changing the organization, apart from obviously destroying it and sort of raising it to the ground. Be influential in other hierarchies, or sort of work your way up in sort of other hierarchies where you can sort of go up really quickly, or sort of be in a high position, and that counteracts the other places where you're having difficulties in. So maybe I was in a really high, I was in a high hierarchy culturally and religiously, and that was counteracting other places where I was quite low in the hierarchy. And that's one of the best ways to kind of become a bit more resilient, is to have lots of other hats that you can use and rely on, and allow you to recharge and rejuvenate and heal, so that then you can go back into the battlefield as a grunt, a medical grunt.
This is where the idea of social mobility, I think, is really important, because definitely when I was growing up, there was a sense, or it was the common sense that we were taught, which is that people who are at the top of the hierarchy find it much easier for their children to get to the top of the hierarchy. This is the concept of privilege. Some people get to go to nicer schools, so they start much higher up the hierarchy. But if you have social mobility, and it's dependent on, well, what are your skills, that determines where you should be. This idea of meritocracy, well, that's better, right? I'm not sure that's quite true anymore, unless you take into account things like social media. So what I would say to people that are not enjoying being near the bottom and are thinking about, well, how can I actually climb this? It seems to take a long time to climb the medical hierarchy. I would say, well, there are some things that you can do now that would help. So develop an interest in something else and spend your free time learning about that. Because if you develop an extra skill, or if you launch a YouTube channel or a podcast, or something that you're interested in, that is going to build extra credibility. That's you claiming a sort of different hierarchy, and you're getting a head start on everybody else. And as a doctor, you have some financial resources quite early on that you can direct towards trying to meet that goal. So, for example, we were chatting before we came on the podcast about some of the camera and recording equipment that we're using. That's like a good investment if you're going to make that a long-term thing. So yeah, I'd encourage people to figure out what extra thing it is that you can do, and then start doing it and start putting yourself out there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And look, I mean, we are complicated beings, and there's a lot of intermingled meshing of different identities and different psyches. But I think an identity that has utility is really important, and to identify with those things that has beneficial outcomes in your life is really important. And we know what they are. I mean, it's a matter of actually writing these out and sort of studying them. So a lot of self-reflection and sort of self-study, really. And I mean, I realized from an early age that the soul or the psyche is something really important for the human being. And I've always been interested in sort of the metaphysical aspect of the human's existence. And once you start medical school, that sort of gets kicked out of the park. And that was my biggest gripe.
That's not just a medical school phenomenon. I think the mainstream culture in Britain is very, very anti talking about spirituality in any shape or form. That started to soften a little because people are talking about mindfulness now, but they only ever talk about it in the context of all right, I need to do this thing called mindfulness so that I can de-stress and give myself space to connect with, well, not really sure what, but that enables me to continue and do the thing that's stressing me out for a little bit longer. And that's about as far as the conversation goes.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a thing about evidence-based knowledge. So it always has to be evidence-based, and they use an empirical form of evidence. And as we all know, there's lots of things that are not empirical and are in that sort of conscious space, so to speak. And consciousness is still a debatable phenomenon. So it's all up for grabs, really.
It's interesting because when I think about this thing about evidence-based medicine, which I totally believe in, I think it's really important.
Have to say that.
Well, no, but it's not just about paying lip service to it. Like, evidence-based medicine is really important, but you also have to ask the question: well, how much evidence is practical to develop? Yeah. For example, Trisha Greenhalgh, who's a professor of public health, she often gives the example. Well, there's not been a randomized control trial of parachutes saving people from jumping out of planes, because it would be totally unethical to do that trial, because we've got a pretty good idea that if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, you're going to die. That doesn't mean that you need the randomized control trial to say that. That just means that there's a different bar, there's a different burden of proof, there's a different level of evidence that you need to make that argument. So when we talk about evidence-based healthcare, and when we're talking about mindfulness, we need to really say, well, how much evidence is practical for the question that we have? And, I think if you're thinking about yourself as an individual and your sense of purpose, then, it matters less whether a trial has, you try this out and see if you make a change and that makes a big difference to your life, then subjectively, then you're obviously going to keep doing that, aren't you?
Having recently finished medical school, I mean, how much did evidence-based medicine I mean, how much of that was sort of part of the curriculum and sort of part of, the teaching process?
Yeah, I think it's something that was referenced a lot, and sometimes that they would talk about the levels of evidence. So you have class 1A, 2A, 2B, and different kinds of evidence. And when you have guidelines, those frameworks are kind of matched to the recommendations. So you can say this recommendation, this guideline is based on this kind of evidence. But I don't think we went deeper into the whole philosophy of evidence-based medicine, of, well, what are the limits of getting evidence? What kind of trials just don't get funded or aren't practical? What other forms of scientific inquiry can we use that might make a practical difference and not require as many resources? What can we do with this data that we routinely collect in terms of statistical analysis? Those questions weren't really asked. It was very much just formulaic. Oh, this guidance is based on this recommendation. That means it's good. And that's dogma. That's dogmatic thinking. It doesn't encourage people to challenge, actually, in this paper, what were the weaknesses of it? I think that's how evidence-based medicine should be taught.
Yeah, I mean, coming from my experience of being in healthcare for over 20 years, I know the guidelines, and sometimes you go beyond the guidelines because it's not relevant for the patient that's sitting in front of you. And it boils down to your own clinical judgment and your justification for the way that you treat patients. And yeah, evidence-based medicine's actually politically driven, I think.
Mm-hmm. And you can see why. So
yeah, I mean, it's very costly, and the industry is massive. The industry is absolutely massive. And every time I see a particular representative of a medical corporation talking about different evidences, using the well-known structures of evidence-based medicine, I know it doesn't apply to me because I've developed this intuition. I've developed this ability to know what's relevant according to my experience for my patient. And I know that there's sort of an underlying hidden agenda coming from the other party.
Yeah, I would disagree with you slightly.
Yeah.
So tell me what you think of this. But I do think there is a logic underpinning, what you're meaning by evidence-based medicine being politically motivated. And because I think that there have been scandals where people haven't followed guidance that they probably should have. And that has led to unnecessary loss of life. So I can see that if you're working in the government and you're having reports piling up on your desk, which the media might attack you for and assign responsibility for you to failing to do something about it, it becomes very easy for them to say, well, we're just going to make this guidance. We're going to base it on this evidence. The politicians saying, oh yeah, we're following the science, and that's all they have to do to deflect responsibility from them. So I think it's good to follow guidance where it's there, but yeah, where it doesn't apply or where the patient in front of you is in a particular situation that the guidance, it doesn't really apply to, then yes, we absolutely need to be able to recognize those situations and use our judgment to do that. But I think we should also be thinking about, well, actually, can we get evidence that what I'm doing works? Because if what you're doing does work, there should be some evidence that you can collect that will convince other people that it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So
no,
yeah,
I agree with you. I agree with you when I say evidence-based medicine is political, in the sense that it does it to benefit as many people within a society. So that's my definition of politics. It sort of convey that sort of overarching wisdom in order to benefit the majority of society, rather than some sinister activity, for the purpose of control and an acquisition of power. And rightly so. If you've got an alternative way of treating patients, then it's definitely worth collecting the empirical evidence and presenting it and putting it forward amongst your peers. So yeah, I mean, I agree on both accounts. But as a clinician, it's difficult, particularly if you're not part of a major institution and you don't have the financial means. And unfortunately, I think it's gone a bit too far down the financial sort of driven industry, and not everyone's in that position of financial privilege.
It's definitely something we need to talk more about just how much time and research gets spent trying to apply for funding and the incentives that come with that.
Yeah. I mean, if there can be sort of specialists or sort of people who really love, finding innovative ways of reducing costs and increasing efficiencies in conducting these studies, so that it can benefit a lot of us. But I mean, the other issue is that we should be able to have these debates and have these conversations about serious health, public health issues, rather than just shutting it down and sort of calling it fake news or being threatened with sanctions and professional.
I mean, how do you think we get to that where these things actually are openly talked about? Because I'm imagining that you probably agree with me in that there isn't much open discussion at the moment, and definitely not discussion that actually influences what happens at a policy level.
I mean, I don't know much about policy level because I'm not involved in that, but sort of on a local level, I think it's okay. So locally, I do have a greater say in sort of how I run things and how I treat my patients in the different pathways. But on a larger level, there needs to be a political will at the end of the day, isn't it? That these different opposing ideas have a place and have a space for them to sit down and keep debating about it, and keep having that dialogue, keeping the channels open.
So what are the discussions that are important to you, Haidar? What do you think we should be focusing on?
In terms of health, I think sort of psychological well-being, I think that's really important. Making it more of a mainstay in how we treat patients. So rather than just concentrating on the physical aspect of the patient and their biochemical aspect, also talking about the psychological well-being and sort of making it part of the whole holistic package of dealing with your patient. Unfortunately, in this day and age of quick clicks and what's the word, clickbaits and all that kind of stuff, it's sort of difficult because we're sort of trained to look at this blood test equals this medication and this level equals this particular clinical pathway.
So there's something about the effect on clinicians as people of all of this kind of algorithmic thinking. Is that kind of that seems to be the sense that I get from speaking to you, but also speaking to a lot of my other colleagues. They don't quite like being a cog in a wheel and the effect that has on them. They want to have discussions about that.
Yeah, I think so. But that's my personal view because I've always been interested in these sort of the deeper aspects of human being and also human well-being. And I think it's more than just these mechanistic and sort of algorithmic pathways. And I mean, even now they're doing apps to deal with people's psychological well-being. Oh, have you had your 10 minutes of meditation? Have you had your 10 minutes of taking your bare feet onto the grass, and it's like, what the fuck? I mean, we're not that stupid, and then they're bringing this kind of well-being apps into the workplace, to make sure that your manager keeps an eye on you, and you're doing your 10 minutes of barefoot walking outside, outside in the artificial grass that the company's made for you.
I don't think you need to be a scientist to sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah,
I was going to say, you don't need to be a scientist to know that those things aren't going to make a big difference. If you're not addressing the reasons why people feel that way, having an app is not going to make a huge impact. You kind of reminded me of something else that I was going to say earlier when you were talking about that kind of the psychological well-being, and how do clinicians actually get in touch with that. And I know that in my own experience, the way I've dealt with that question is to try and read more widely than just the scientific literature. So reading the psychology literature has been really helpful to me in terms of understanding myself through the Big Five personality model, which does have an evidence base to it. And, you can do your Big Five personality questionnaire and, get where you lie in terms of the population spread. And then you go, oh, that's why I find that difficult. So I'm very, very extroverted. That's why I didn't have a very good time when I was doing my research post and I was just having to work on a spreadsheet in a room on my own. Okay, that gives me some clue about what I could do in future to address that. And I've also been finding it we've been talking a lot about faith in this discussion, but reading some of the scholarly literature from Islamic thinkers. So I'm reading a book by Al-Ghazali, who lived in the year 1000, around the time of the Second Crusade. And he was a totally eminent intellectual of his time. And he wrote lots of books about you're trying to find your purpose in life, and about how you deal with the stresses and the different pressures that might be on you that kind of knock you away from finding that. And I've been finding that incredibly useful. Having a window into a different culture often, I think, helps you solve some of the problems where you can't find the answer to that struggle that you're going through in your own culture. That's why I think, coming from a mixed race background has been really useful for me. So I've got this window into this whole other civilization, and I can go and read somebody like Al-Ghazali and go, actually, that's quite useful. I'm gonna pinch that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what it's about. These are more profound questions, more deeper questions, which, in essence, are more religious questions, around purpose and around origin, and, around the whyness and the reasons for this existence, and, the whole concept about consciousness and sort of self-awareness and self-consciousness. And as physicians of a few centuries ago, they were essentially polymaths. So, they were versed in all the different sciences and the arts and the philosophies of all the other ways of life. And, having that being much more canonical than, look, we all take a social history, don't we? That
Mm-hmm.
that's part and parcel of the medical history taking. Maybe there should be some kind of psychological history as well, and maybe even some kind of psychology is kind of soul food, and maybe we should have a bit more soul food in our medical food as well. So maybe that's something I'd like to see a lot more. And whenever I sort of open this so-called can of psychological worms with my patient, we have a bit more of an interesting talk, and when I say, oh yes, by the way, you do have glaucoma, and it's affecting your vision, and you've lost half of your peripheral vision, it's maybe it's a bit easier. I personally feel easier, and I'm a reasonable empath, and I can feel other people's emotions, and they seem a bit easier as well. And I think, if the physician feels easier, the patient feels easier as well. there is that kind of
I
flow.
totally agree with.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Maybe I'm delusional. I don't know, but probably not. You know, I do feel easier when I can open up about these topics with my patients, and but I think
probably helps them too.
Yeah, I mean, it's about human connections, and you know, the studies show that, you know, particularly in palliative care, if you can connect with the patient on a human level, on a conscious level, on a self-conscious level, then it does help the you know, reducing the suffering. And I may be wrong, I don't know, but I think it helps.
Part of the dogma that they teach at medical school these days, you know, I say dogma, but I'm not too critical of it. But it's this idea of the biopsychosocial model. So the patient has a particular pathology. That's the scientific aspect of it. But there's the whole social and psychological impact. And you can't really understand the illness of the patient without understanding those things. So I think that taking a psychological history, it has infiltrated into the mainstream consciousness of the medical profession. And I personally have found it really helpful to know, you know, a bit of how my patient is dealing with something, to be able to know how to talk to them about it and how to encourage them through the next steps of what they're going to have to do, what their journey is going to be. And I think if we don't do that as a profession, then we're being neglectful of those other aspects of health.
Yeah,
and we shouldn't do that.
And you know, one of the things that I regret sort of in medical school is actually spending more time in the psychiatry sphere, because it had a particular flavor to it, or a particular reputation that wasn't very good, and that kind of put me on guard. Whereas if I was to do it again, I'd definitely spend, you know, a lot more time in that sphere. And, you know, over the last 7 years now, I've spent a lot more time with psychiatrists and psychologists and psychotherapists and psychoanalysts. And it's just so fun. And also, on the same token, is that they're spending more time with the biological doctors and the the organic doctors, so to speak.
Yeah.
So they're getting a more holistic approach as well, because, you know, they realize that the organic aspect of disease is also relevant to them, and their wonderful world of the unseen and the unconscious. But yeah, I mean, I was totally fascinated by the unconscious, and I spent a lot of time doing some hypnotherapy work, and you know, that was even more fascinating. And then I got interested in black magic, which was pretty
that's pretty out there.
Yeah, it's nice, and I'm in talks with a chap about doing a sort of a horror comic about a horrific doctor who gets up to no good. So that's the current.
I really enjoyed my psychiatry placement, I have to say.
Oh wow, you lucky bugger.
I had it was a couple of weeks, I think, in Addenbrooke's, and which is in Cambridge, and there's a one of the psychiatrists who was running the placement was called Dr. Christmas, and he was a Scottish guy, and I learned so much from him. He was really, really funny, and just seeing him do a mental state examination, you started to realize actually there's quite a lot of objective signs that people give off when they're depressed in mood, or when their mood is elevated, or when they're experiencing psychosis. And having those sorts of things that you've seen them before, so you can pick up on them, is incredibly useful in all walks of life. Speaking to people.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Definitely. Are you a football fan?
So I have to say I'm not. I'm disappointed to say that, because my dad is a massive football fan, and we used to play football in the park. You know, that was our favorite thing to do together. So you know, he likes to watch his Egyptian clubs as well as watching the Premier League, but it's not something I've I have to say that I've had much time for. But going to the odd game here and there, like I definitely do enjoy that, and I like watching the World Cup. But that's where it kind of ends, I'm afraid.
So who do you support in the World Cup? Is it Egypt or Scotland?
Oh well, Scotland. When we actually managed to get to the World Cup.
Yeah. And you must be a fan of Mo Salah. Come on.
Yeah, I mean he's done quite a lot for Egypt, for representing Muslims as well, and obviously for Liverpool.
Yeah. I mean, I was a big Liverpool fan back in the 80s, early 80s. And then Alex Ferguson came along, that wonderful Scottish man. And then that's when my depression started, literally. Liverpool went down the pan and Man U went up, up in the stars.
And do you still support Liverpool?
No. Luckily I started medical school just at the start of the 90s, and that was my excuse for not, I stopped enjoying myself, I guess. It was like, oh yes, that's it, purpose. You gotta do all this stuff and get back home and help all the people, and the start of the end, really.
I think this whole domain of sports psychology is also really interesting. Like these players are at the absolute top of their game. They have to be so driven, so psychologically feeling their own purpose. I mean, what does Mohamed Salah do if he feels a bit down one day? That whole side of things, how do you manage the player's psychology? Find that really, really interesting. And someone like Alex Ferguson that managed to, I mean, he's just such a good strategic thinker and a good manager, and really brought the team with him. What is it about him that enabled that to happen? Yeah. That's another question that I find really interesting. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, for me, I remember just before operating, and I remember I was in Iraq and I had to operate on one of the father of the Ayatollah at the time. So you can imagine.
Yeah, so the pressure's on as soon as someone says Ayatollah.
Yeah, your neck is literally on the line. You just have a routine. You have many micro routines that you put in place in order to get into the zone and really focus, and that was it. Emotion went out the window. Future disasters went out the window. Previous disasters went out the window. It's just literally, right, this is what I've got to do. A, B, C, and D, focus. Disasters did happen at the time. I remember I was operating on the father of the Ayatollah, and then the electricity switched off, as it does in Iraq. So, I had the instruments inside his eyes, and then
but you can't see anything, presumably.
Yeah, everything went dark, and then it takes about 20 seconds for the local generator to sort of kick in, the hospital generator to kick in.
And you're just trying to make sure that you've not moved in those 20 seconds.
Well, you've got to take the instruments out. And you just essentially pray, and then it comes on, and you look down, and you just got to cross your fingers, and hopefully it's not an absolute disaster. And luckily it wasn't. His son did come in, not the Ayatollah, but his brother. He did come in and, made sure, I was still there and carrying on.
His eyes were fine, I guess.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God. Yeah, his eyes were fine. He did really well. It was surreal. It was really surreal. And looking back, I'd never do that ever again. Sort of. But I think, when you're young, you do some crazy stuff.
I'd be interested, where did they get back in touch with you afterwards? Did they thank you? What exactly does an Ayatollah do after a sight-saving surgery?
Well, it's sort of part and parcel of the faith, and you're sort of another minion in the hierarchy. So I did a task and I did an operation, and that was it. But I guess it's there in history. So whenever I do go back, occasionally they say, "Oh yes, Dr. Al-Hakim." But you don't think about these things at the time. You just think about, right, I'm going to stay here in the moment. I've got my routines. If this complication, I do this. If this complication happens, so you sort of just get yourself in the present, and I think that's what they do. As professional. I mean, we look at them and we're in awe of them, and the same with our patients. They look at us in awe of us. For what we do, but really we've developed so many small micro routines that we just get into the flow, we stay in the present, we do the thing, and we leave.
I'd have been the total opposite of you. I would have been so excited, and I would be thinking, right, it'll be really churlish of them if they don't invite me for Eid after doing this.
I mean, I don't know. I think, I mean, I've always been involved in that kind of sphere, and it was sort of part and parcel of I mean, I don't want to say the brainwashing sort of life, but we're all programmed, and the brain picks certain things, and then eventually we have to drop them, and well, we don't drop them, we just upgrade them, and I think we've got to keep upgrading our software into more challenges.
I mean, your faith is obviously something that's really important to you, Haidar, and I have to ask this question because you kind of hinted at it a couple of times, but I'd be interested to know where you are with the whole religion thing now. You said that it's been a bit of a journey, so where are you at in terms of your thinking on that now? Well,
I mean, I've realized that it's better to be within a structure than outside of it, whereas before it was no, I'm going to do my own thing. So yeah, I mean, I consider myself, within the structure of Islam, and I know the Shia ideology very well. So yeah, that's where I am. But I'm willing to learn from other ways of life and other faiths and other ways of being, because I know I don't want to get too rigid, and I was probably too rigid before. I'm sure I'm still rigid now. I'm not rigid at the moment, but I'm sure I'm still rigid in my ways in certain things, and I'm willing to keep learning, and I'm looking forward to new realizations. I mean, that's a very wishy-washy answer, I know.
I wasn't going to say anything. I was just going to let you speak.
Yeah. I mean, it's a wishy-washy answer, but I prefer to be wishy-washy rather than be quite concrete. But cataract operations, glaucoma management, it's good to have some structure to start you off, but then I think being wishy-washy after that is necessary for our individual patients, and also our personal individual journeys. So
I think podcasting's been absolutely fabulous. The idea that two people can have a conversation now and anybody can listen to it and benefit from it is absolutely fantastic. I love speaking to people. I love getting into the nitty gritty of why does somebody see the world this way instead of the way I see it. Just getting the chance to delve into that and understand it a bit better. It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah. It's a great opportunity, and whereas before you'd have a really interesting conversation, but no one would listen to it. This time people can think, shit, that was really good, and or maybe you thought you had a shit conversation, and people say, oh, actually, it was quite good. And also the benefit of this is you can go back and listen again and sort of learn new things and have new insights into topics that you thought you knew about. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing, and also it's sort of here to stay for another whatever million years, or however long we stay on this planet for.
However long we keep the power on.
I think the power's always there. I mean, if the sun's there, the power is there. So the power's around, and we're constantly striving for something better. That's a great thing about human beings. So there's this constant movement towards growth and betterment, and I think that's the overlying sense that most human beings have, and that's the thing that wins most of the time. So may we win more and more.
Well, I'll say amen to that, as they say in the deep south.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. It's been a great pleasure, and it's been an interesting kind of double podcast take. And let's see where we go from
I've
here.
very much enjoyed it, and it's been nice to get to sort of be the guest rather than the host, at least for a while.
Well, I mean, next time what we can do is we can do a proper, like, kind of, one, because you kind of mixed it today. We kind of mixed it today.
It's an interesting experiment. I think it's worked quite well. And, I think we have had a really interesting discussion. Be more than happy to come back some other time and do it again.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Zach. It's been great.
All the best. If you like the podcast, the best way to support it at this stage is to tell your friends about it and share it on social media. You can use the hashtag Healthy Discussions or my Twitter handle @MontereyZach to tell me your thoughts about this episode. In the description, you'll find more about our guests' work and their book recommendations. Thanks to Health Education England North East, Health Education England South West, and Medics Academy for supporting this episode. All of us at the Healthcare Leadership Academy are grateful for their support.